Well, here we are at the Old Crow Speed Shop with Bobby Green, the proprietor. Bobby, thanks for having us. This place is amazing, and I understand you just moved here after being in Burbank for about 15 years.
Yeah, well, Maurice, thanks for coming by.
Absolutely.
It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I got the place in 2016, but it took a year to remodel. It took a couple years to move in.
Sure.
Luckily, we had Burbank to slowly kind of transition from while we did it. So yeah. Right. And then the pandemic hit. I haven't really done any parties or anything here, so you're one of the few that have seen it.
Well, everywhere you look, I mean, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, it was a lot of U-Haul moves. I mean, luckily it's only 20 minutes down the highway.
Right, and you were able to do it gradually, obviously.
Yeah, and gradually. That's the key.
Well, this is literally a lifetime's worth of collecting. I know this isn't everything. You've kind of let things go over the years, and you've kept what you really cherish.
Yeah. Well, I've learned some valuable lessons with Burbank. One is, no matter how big of a space someone gives me, I will fill it.
Right.
And that's not a good thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially when you have to move. It's not a good thing. So, yeah, I had a lot of multiples and multiples of parts, engines and parts. It's one of those things like, well, I might as well keep this on the back shelf because I have room for it. I might need it one day, or someone will need it. So you end up with like a giant stockpile of just stuff, and stuff that's replaceable. Nothing, flathead water pumps or heads or something like that. But So when I had to leave Burbank, I just had giant yard sales. Just come take the stuff away for cheap. Just get it into hand so it doesn't have to get scrapped, because so much gets scrapped with situations like that.
Yeah, you kind of get forced in a corner where you've got nowhere to put it, and you've got no time to sort it or really make those decisions other than, okay, put it in the bin.
Exactly. Yeah. So I got it all into the hands of other hoarders. Now it's their problem now, not mine. And so I just my goal was, I'm just going to keep like the really good stuff, the really rare stuff that you can't really replace easily.
Well, and we'll have to talk about some of this stuff in here, but just so people know, this is a converted church. Built in what, the 30s?
In the 20s.
In the 20s.
Yeah, built in the 20s.
Okay.
Yeah, sadly the preacher had died, and the kids didn't want to keep it going, and so it went on the market. And so I was looking to buy a shop, so I could move out of Burbank. And shop space in LA is just insane, pricing-wise, just nuts. And so this happened to be much more reasonable, I think. And it was one of those situations I fall into a lot where people don't have a vision for things. They can't see beyond what it is, And luckily I can see far beyond what it is. Give me anything, give me a high school and I'll turn it into a shop or something cool. So a church is perfect. And I mean, I remember growing up as a teenager thinking, man, it'd be really cool to get a church and just live in it.
Yeah.
Why not?
Absolutely. Old churches, old firehouses.
Firehouses for sure. Yeah.
Well, we're sort of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit because, first of all, some people are wondering, what's Old Crow Speed Shop? And we can talk about also kind of the genesis of your automotive fascination and the particular time period that you're really interested in, which is roughly the turn of the 20th century to about 1950, right?
I'd say so. Yeah, that's a perfect place to put it. So Old Crow started as the name of the belly tank that I built for Bonneville. And what I try to do with anything is create a meaning. I don't like just having mindless names or even just mindless things in a collection without there being some sort of deeper meaning to them, So I was building this car, and the car's made from a World War II auxiliary gas tank that would hang below an aircraft fighter plane. They would use those to get more fuel so they could fly further, and then they would drop them. They call them drop tanks too, because they would just drop them from the bottom of the plane. But they were really aerodynamic, right? So the government spent millions of dollars in the 40s to create these aerodynamic pods. And then you've got these teenagers that go to World War II who are hot rodders, they see these pods, and there were some guys before the war that were hammering out bodies for their hot rods to be really streamlined. A ton of work, obviously. You're hand forming this whole thing. Well, they go to World War II, they see this thing that looked just like Bob Rufi or one of these guys had made for their car, and they're like, I'm going to get one of those after the war and make a car out of it. So that's how the belly tank or drop tank came to be a race car.
Sure, and after the war surplus, they were a dime a dozen.
They were like $20.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you could buy them by the stack, especially here in Burbank. They were, because Lockheed was right there. So the Lockheed had the best tank. It was the P-38 aircraft. So I wanted to build one. I wanted to build one to kind of recreate or honor my heroes, that I was looking at in old books and old black and white photos and whatnot. So I'm building this car, and I'm thinking, every good car back then had a name. People don't really name their cars so much anymore, but it was a tradition for a long time. So I wanted to name the car. As you know, I'm in the bar business.
Right.
So I'm looking at this tank and I'm thinking, what can I name this car? What has some meaning, Now, there was a famous aircraft in World War II flown by Bud Anderson called the Old Crow. It was a P-51 Mustang.
Same squadron as Chuck Yeager.
Yes, exactly. I think he was the most decorated fighter pilot of World War II. He's still alive. He lives up in Auburn, California. He's in his 90s. So the Old Crow was named by him after whiskey, the Old Crow whiskey, right? So, and of course, I sell Old Crow whiskey in the bar.
Naturally.
So, what a perfect combination, right? A car built from a World War II plane, paid for by the sale of whiskey. Right, so that's what it meant to me. Like, I'm going to name this car the Old Crow. And it also tells stories. Like, whenever you do something like that, you're passing on a legacy, you're passing on a story about Bud, about his plane, about World War II, about whiskey, and we're sitting here talking about it today.
Right.
20 years later.
And it's Americana.
It's Americana, exactly. And Americana, we have so many good stories.
Yeah, we don't want those to disappear.
Exactly. So the Old Crow, and I built this in a tiny garage in my house, and so we started racing it. Me and friends started racing the car and setting some records, having a lot of fun. We raced vintage 4-cylinders, so Model A engines, basically. And had a blast, been racing for years. So got a chance to get this shop in Burbank, and the price was right. It was a bitchin' old building. I mean, it was like an old Quonset hut kind of, tin roof, wood framed, and it was one of those things like, what do I name the shop? Well, everyone knew the car, so I just named it after the car.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Now, was the shop intended as kind of your storage space and sort of a place to play, or did you go into it with a mind to making it a business?
Well, I didn't necessarily want to make it a full business. I thought maybe me and friends could do little side jobs, but I want it to be more of like an all-purpose place where me and friends could work on cars, but we could also have a lot of parties. We could have a little museum/speed shop where we could sell vintage parts. So
it was your clubhouse.
Yeah, it was a clubhouse. It was, but really just purely selfishly, it was like, I need way more space than I have in my little garage now. I want to build some more cars. I want to do this. I want to do that. So it was just a space to do that. But then it turned into so much more. It turned into kind of a living history shop, a place that people wanted to visit, a place that we could do photo shoots or just anything creative that we could think of. I'd give it to friends for music videos. We would just do all kinds of fun stuff there. And that's what it became. And it grew itself into a brand is really, it was never an intention, let's create a brand, or that's how it happened.
Well, but you laid the groundwork. That was just a natural progression. into a brand.
I suppose, yeah.
If you ask me.
Yeah, I suppose, maybe in hindsight. I never thought of it that way, though.
Yeah. You've lived in Southern California most of your life, but you actually originally were from Oklahoma, right?
Mm-hmm. Born there. Moved here when I was 10. We had a farm, but then my dad was an artist. Mm-hmm. So he started a stained glass company and did a lot of churches in the Midwest, stained glass. So I grew up, I realized later in life, I grew up learning from my parents and my peers that you just work for yourself. That's just what you do. Like, no one in my family had a job, ever. They all worked for themselves, whether they were farmers or stained glass business or whatever. So I just grew up thinking that was the normal thing to do. Which kind of bit me in the butt when I started trying to get a job, later in life. I think I had a job at like 17 and 18, and I was basically fired from every single job I had. Every job I was fired from. And so that's why I just had to start my own business. Right. And I did in my early 20s.
Now, you were in the coffee business originally, right?
Yeah, opened a coffee house.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was going to follow kind of my dad. I did a lot of art as a kid. My dad put me in like a drawing class when I was 5 years old. Art was just what I wanted to do. And then I started kind of refining it, like, well, do I want to do architecture? Do I want to do maybe product design or something like that? And so I was taking all kinds of design classes and stuff and doing some interior stuff. And then I was going to go to Art Center and do environmental design. Environmental design is really neat because it's kind of like you're designing environments.
Right.
Like Disneyland was done by environmental designers. So it's beyond just designing a thing. But then the opportunity came up to buy this little coffee house from the guy who had fired me several years prior. He called me. So I was working in coffee houses, right? And I was hanging out with artists, we were having art shows and whatnot. And of course I was fired from one, and I would just move to a different coffee house and eventually get fired. And the guy called me one day and he said, hey, you and your friends always said you could do a better job than me. Do you want to buy me out? That's exactly what he said.
Wow.
And I said, let me call you right back. So I called some friends and said, hey, let's try to get some money together and buy this guy out.
Perfect.
So I sold a car.
Okay.
Again, an old car. I had a Nash Metropolitan.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yep.
And I think I bought it for like $50 because it had no transmission. And then I always go to Bob's Big Boy.
Right.
Hang out. This was not in Burbank. It was the previous location, like Reseda or something. And I was telling somebody, hey, I got a Nash Metropolitan. I need a transmission. And they go, oh, well, go talk to Metro Bob. He's right over there. I'm like, okay. So I went talk to Metro Bob. He's like, oh, yeah, I got one on the side of the house. $20.
Perfect.
I'm like, okay, I'll come get it. Put it in, Anyway, I sold the thing for like $3,500. And that was the money that me and friends pooled together, and we bought this little coffee house.
Nice. And so how do we get from coffee to whiskey?
Well, it's a weird, it seems odd now, right? But back then, early 90s, this is pre-Starbucks days, right?
Can you even imagine that now?
I know.
I know,
exactly. So coffee houses at the time were more like little bars. Like people would hang out all night long.
Sure.
Play chess, backgammon.
Live music,
have art shows, drink coffee. It was very bohemian. Mm-hmm. So it was it was like a bar for the under 21 crowd. I get all the college kids. And so it was a real natural progression at the time. So I was 23 when I opened the coffee house. I'm going to bars. I'm going to Hollywood, hitting all the cool spots and thinking, this is so cool. This is just like what I'm doing, except they actually could make money because we didn't make any money,
right.
But we met a lot of cool people.
You're building a network.
Sure.
You're learning the business. You're learning what to do and what not to do.
It was business college for sure. It was trial by fire. 6 years of just figure it out. Yeah. And so that was my business college. So I spent years wanting to open a bar, running the coffee house, meeting people. I made a little pitch deck book with the concept of this log cabin bar. It's vintage style log cabin bar.
Kind of a Northwoods theme.
Yeah. Which is oddly enough, I didn't even know about Northwoods back then, which is so funny. Other than driving to Disneyland and seeing the snow on the roof. But yeah, it was that vibe. It was like, and I knew all my friends would be into it because I knew everybody in the bar scene as a 20-something-year-old, you know. Yeah. And so it took me several years to find investors because I couldn't do it on my own. And I finally found 2 guys who are still my partners today, believe it or not, 22, 23 years later.
That's rare.
Very rare. Very rare.
Well, you proved yourself early on, and you just kind of took one step at a time. And now the 1933 group, which is your company, has 11 different hospitality properties. They all have a distinctive theme. They're all historically significant to Los Angeles. So there's an element, a huge element of preservation, and you're passing along something that would otherwise have been lost.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so fortunate that I could find a way to bring my own personal passions for saving history, even from a completely selfish way, you know, like this place is so cool, I love it so much, you know, and then I get a chance to share it, save it, restore it, share it with the world, and then meet all those like-minded people.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite of all of your bars?
No, I did for years. For years and years, my favorite was always the first one, the Bigfoot Lodge, because that's the one that kind of launched, you know, who we are, what we do, and what we're going to do. But I think that changed by the time the Idle Hour came around, because prior to the Idle Hour, we were kind of, I guess, recreating places or creating places that could have been in LA or should have been in LA or something like that. Whereas the Idle Hour was truly a place to save and restore, a historical place.
Now the Idle Hour is a giant beer barrel, right?
Yeah, or whiskey barrel.
Or whiskey barrel.
Yeah, it's a giant wooden barrel, 2 stories tall.
Wow.
Yeah. And at one time, believe it or not, there were as many as 11 or 12 barrels in Los Angeles.
Wow.
Different owners. Just that was a really popular
theme
style to pick as a building. Yeah.
Now, this is called programmatic architecture, right?
Yeah, programmatic, sometimes mimicry architecture. And it basically was spawned by the automobile, which is the greatest part about it.
Okay, good. You know, so this is interesting history.
It is interesting history, especially if you're a car person.
Right.
You know, so before the Model T was in everybody's garage, you probably had a bicycle or a horse or a buggy, you know, or you walked. And so all these businesses everywhere were just getting people walking by. So all you needed was a little sign that said shoemaker, you know, or tap room.
You'd hang your shingle.
Exactly. But once cars started whizzing by at 25 miles an hour, then business owners were freaking out. And these people who had cars were going much further out of town, further on dirt roads than they ever did before. So there was a new opportunity to create businesses a little further away, and that's what made the city grow. And Los Angeles, a lot of people don't know, is the only city in America designed around the automobile. The automobile completely shaped what we have is this giant grid of a city. Other cities are all like all European style and weird, but LA is a giant grid. And so that guys were opening businesses, and they wanted the motorists to see their business from a block away. So that was the whole point. And back then, you could build anything you want. We had this kind of, as Americans, we had this kind of crazy can-do attitude, you know, like anything goes, especially Los Angeles.
Right.
It was the city of anything goes. especially with the movie industry.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, imagine driving down the street and suddenly you see the Ben-Hur set, or you see, you know, Egypt's pyramids and sphinxes. I mean, this started becoming commonplace.
Right.
So why not build your restaurant to look like a giant hat, or a giant dog, or whatever you liked that would stand out? And that's how it became a trend. And we had hundreds of them around LA. My friend Jim Hyman did an amazing book, California Crazy. And it's a big, heavy book filled with images of these buildings. And you don't realize how many there were until you start looking through this book. There were a lot.